very strongly that all of this is interconnected.
If you want to go ahead and push record, I think we're good to go.
Perfect. Awesome. Good afternoon and 1,000 silver salutations to you all. Thank you and thank you for coming. Welcome to our second Lunchtime Speaker Series of 2021. I want to thank our contributors and partners. We are still on a mission to build support for funding regional transit, and we could not do it without that support. The Transit Alliance believes that individual freedoms are directly tied to mobility, and that transit is the most critical tool in the multimodal toolbox for supporting greater mobility and access to enhanced foundations of living, like education, jobs, healthcare, social engagements, and so much more. So today, though, we are talking about, I would say, the most vital component of transit, and that's the funding. Without funding, we don't got it. And I know we've all heard, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But what do we do when something really is broken? How do we address decades-long funding standards and what they've brought us today? Put a pin in that. We're going to get right to it with our speaker today. Please welcome Beth Osborne, Director for Transportation for America, a remarkably insightful woman. I am so proud she visits with us. Now, along the way, there's going to be links dropped into the chat. Please visit them at your leisure. You can also see more about Beth on our website and, of course, at t4america.org. So, Beth, again, thanks so much for spending time with us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Transportation for America?
Sure. So Transportation for America is a national nonprofit made up of local transit, regional, state transportation leaders, elected leaders, civic leaders who support a transportation system that connects people to jobs and essential services by all modes of travel, no matter their financial means or physical abilities. We do our work through direct advocacy, through research and analysis of how the existing system is or isn't working, and through direct technical assistance with those who are interested in addressing the challenges with their transportation systems locally or at the state level. I'm the director. When I started now about 3 years ago, we decided to update our approach and really look at, particularly at the federal level, how we wanted to interact with transportation stakeholders and the debate over reauthorizing the nation's surface transportation programs. Traditionally, the way groups who were interested in some changes interacted was to say, of course, we believe there should be more funding, but with more funding should come some improvements. And I often say that one of the ways I determine how to conduct myself today is based on how many ways I've lost in the past. And I just discovered that I'd lost too many ways or too many times that way. So we changed our approach. We pivoted and said, this program shouldn't receive money until it updates, until congressional leaders and the administration update the mission of the program to get the outcomes that we need today, rather than pouring money into a program that was designed in the 1950s and updated in the 1980s. And at first that kind of scared people.
Yeah. I'm going to say.
Sure, I was just going to say it scared people, but it's worked out okay.
Yeah, well, that was kind of where I wanted to go with this. You know, the first time I heard you speak, it was on Transit Center's High Frequency Podcast, right? Episode 3, Beth Osborne, January 2020. Wow. In that podcast, you said exactly what you just said, paraphrase, right? We're funding transportation and transit based on how we funded it 50 or 60 years ago. That resonated so deeply within me and has really motivated and fueled my fire to see more immediate impact, positive progress for transit funding, specifically in Middle Tennessee and in Nashville. Can you do you mind going a little bit more in depth? Because then you just started, but I want to, yeah, can we hear a little bit more about what that is, what you're talking about?
Yeah, and a lot of people interpret what I say to mean that those who are running the program are purposefully seeking bad ends. And that's not actually what I mean. If that were the case, I think our problems would be easier to solve. It's that they are chasing goals that are no longer relevant or not singularly relevant today. So, in the 1950s, General Eisenhower became President Eisenhower. He had been very impressed by the German Autobahn system, decided we needed a strong interstate highway system, got legislation through to create a funding source to pay for the building out of an interstate system. That went along very well. For years. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration wanted to increase funding for the interstate build out. But a lot of urban representatives were afraid that would not result in any money coming to their districts because they were built out. So they sought money for transit. And that was the deal that was struck to raise taxes in the early 1980s, was a portion of the tax increase would come to transit. And that's when we established the 80-20 split. That's really where the program is sat. Even though we've declared the interstate system basically built back in the early 90s, we've expanded the things that we fund, sort of, to include the national highway system, which really includes all the major roads in urban areas. And we're still very much in a building phase. We're constructing, we're building out. It's hard to shift your entire focus as an institution without some forcing incident. When we work in big institutions, we're kind of like the definition of inertia. We're just going to keep going forward with our mission until acted on by an outside force. And that force has just never occurred. So we're still kind of in that civil engineer world of, we have a system to build here. And on the highway side, after 70 years of a federal program and almost 100 years of state programs in building out highways, it's probably time for a pivot, but we don't really have it within our capacity. And so, yeah, we're still chasing the needs and goals that we had, decades and decades ago, and not talking about what those needs are now. And as the steward of the federal dollar, saying, this investor is looking for X, Y, and Z outcomes.
Right. Yeah, and that's where Transportation for America comes in. That's where other advocacy groups and educational groups come in, right? Because we could feed that information back up, right? In theory.
Yeah. And look, not saying that every single area has, it should be building the same thing or have the exact same needs or challenges, but that's never the case. What you do is you give some parameters, though. So, after building highways for 100 years and interstates for 70, maybe maintenance should be the focus of the program. I think we can agree on a nationwide basis, maintaining the system we built should be a primary concern. And
that's right.
Right. But we're still building. We don't feel like we've created the system that needs maintaining. It's like we've been adding onto our house and haven't noticed that the first part of the house is falling apart. Plus,
we still want to cut those ribbons, right?
Right.
we still want to add those lanes. We still want to add those highways. And this brings me great segue. Earlier this year, Transportation for America published your funding principles. Right. So this was the first one, maintenance, right? Can you walk us through those principles and then maybe give us a little background on how you landed on those specifically?
Oh, sure. So interestingly, we started by saying, kind of looking back at where we've been in the past and always being a little frustrated that, often like do-gooder organizations, you end up with so many priorities. It's hard for people to know really where you're coming from. You know,
Mhm.
you got 7 priorities with, 23 subparts or something awful like that. So we really wanted to hold ourselves to account and say, what's the 3 things we care about? How do we constrict it to 3 things?
Yeah.
And repair was something that we came back to over and over, because so much of the things we feel go wrong are in the constant expansion of the system. So when we say fix it first, we mean often a lot of the policies we actually have in the transit program that we should probably strengthen there, but doesn't exist at all in the highway program. So on the transit program, we've got language that says before you're allowed to build something new, you have to have a plan to operate and maintain it. And you have to show that you can operate and maintain that new asset while operating and maintaining your overall system.
Well, that's
Now,
brilliant.
Doesn't it sound like a great idea?
Yeah.
On the highway side, you could, for example, say, I want to build a $5 billion bypass of an uncongested community in the name of reducing congestion. And at the same time, we have 500 bridges that are structurally deficient that we won't get to. Is that cool? And the answer from the feds are, not our business. You know what's best.
Wow.
And that is preposterous. And that there is a state that is doing that right now. It would be the state of Alabama. And there are a bunch of states that are currently spending more on new stuff while they can't afford to maintain what they already have. So that was an obvious first one. And you can see more on our repair priorities report. The second one was about safety. We always hear people talk about safety being a priority, but people don't really want to get at the things that actually would create safety. And one of the top things would be slowing down traffic. And I think as a nation, we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that when you're in a developed area, you just don't get to go fast. If you want to build something that goes fast where there's development, you need to fully separate that roadway. And if you build a roadway that starts out as a nice throughway, the second you permit development on the side of it, you lose the speed. That should be, if we care about safety, that's the trade-off. And we would do that automatically. We don't actually care about safety. We care about mild convenience.
I was going to say, that's not the standard for grading a road. The standard is speed.
The reverse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Speed is the goal. Speed is the goal because we have put everything you need really far away from you where you live. So we make it up to you by allowing you to go fast, assuming that creates convenience or more convenience. It's our little, I'm so sorry, I've made your life inconvenient. I'll try to fix it by letting you drive super fast. But of course, when everybody's life is inconvenient and everybody has to drive long distances between every single thing they have to do, you have just created the process that generates the maximum amount of congestion with the fewest number of possible people. And even though the posted speed is fast, you can't go fast because you've generated traffic. So, and that's why we saw in 2020 that we had the highest increase in traffic fatality rate in 96 years, because congestion is one of our most effective safety interventions. It slows people down.
Right.
Of course, that's the number one thing we're trying to get rid of as a nation, which shows you exactly where safety ranks in our priorities. And that would be at the bottom. So our priority is safety over speed, which means, yes, drivers will have to slow down because human life is more valuable than your seconds. That's our position. The third priority is evaluating the effectiveness of the system based on how many jobs and essential services you can get to from your home by all modes of travel. We're particularly interested in how those without access to an automobile, how much access they have. Looking at people of color, looking at people with disabilities, very young people, older people just don't have the ability or the money to drive. Or maybe, in a house like mine, a household that has 5 people, can they get by with 3 cars instead of 4, or 2 instead of 3, and rating whether or not the system gives them that access or not. It's something that we now have the ability to do, and to grade projects based on it, basically with the technology you have in your smartphone, but which is not a very new technology. It's getting pretty old. GIS and things like that aren't that new. We take advantage of it in devices we sell to people, like my little phone here. We just don't use it in our transportation program that continues to be reliant on technologies that were developed in the 30s and the 40s.
Fascinating. I want to revisit those first 2 points. Tennessee was $10 billion behind in infrastructure maintenance, our Tennessee Department of Transportation. So in 2017, they worked really hard to pass the IMPROVE Act, which did increase the gas tax and diesel tax and electronic vehicle, tax or registration fee or whatever, to give them that funding to go back and address those bridges that were crumbling across the state. And then also, to your point of safety, recently Nashville specifically has been just reduced to the to 25 miles per hour in urban zones, urban districts. So Nashville is making headway, baby steps. We are paying attention. We got some good people here. And I know your third comment, the last time you visited with us last year, you talked about your experience in, I don't know if it was your first 4 years of college or maybe grad school, not being able to, or having that moment where you either I can get a job, but I've got to buy a car to get a job. I mean, and that again, which resonated very deeply with me, because I think that's part of the course in many American cities, and for many Americans, like we live in a society and economy that presumes or assumes you've got a personal vehicle to participate.
Well, and I think more importantly, we live in a nation and an economy that sends a message to tens of millions of Americans that if you can't afford that, then your work, your productivity, your contribution to the economy is unwanted. And I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Are we telling tens of millions of Americans, if you can't buy, and really all Americans, if you can't buy an automobile, your labor is useless to us. It's disgusting to us, because that really is the message. And that can't possibly be a message for people that want an efficient, effective economy, or to be a land of opportunity.
Right. We don't really want to say, or here, we don't want you to participate, because that's where we're at, which is
absolutely
why we're talking about funding, because we can't have transit infrastructure and greater mobility for wide range of modes without funding it. So
that's right.
Speaking of funding, there have been a slew, 3 stimulus packages, right, for drama, right, a slew of them this past year. Starting with the FTA CARES Act, do you mind just giving us the cliff notes of those, naming them?
Sure. So we had, and I'll tell you honestly, I don't even remember what some of them are called. The CARES Act, the HEROES Act, the blah blah blah. So yeah, we started with the CARES Act. That was last March, at the very end of March. And it was at the very beginning of the shutdown, a lot of rescue funding for all kinds of different parts of the economy, including, making sure that people weren't evicted from their homes, because we knew there was going to be job loss. And
there was something interesting, though, about the FTA CARES Act, right? That was a departure from federal government funding in the past.
Yeah, I think it's important to know it really was a tiny part of this bill. This was a monster bill, but
right, the big CARES Act, but the FTA part.
Yeah, in that, I had realized that with the shutdown, I mean, even with just federal government shutdowns, there had been real damage to our transit system, and realizing the whole economy was going to shut down nationwide. I realized that was going to hit hard. We started talking to appropriations staff and said, "Oh my God, are you going to put money in for transit to make sure it keeps operating?" And folks said, "Oh shoot, we hadn't thought about that one." But on both sides of the hill, folks stepped up really quickly and they put $25 billion for transit emergency operating assistance to keep the systems running.
Operative word there was operations funding. What? Can you believe it? That was awesome.
To all agencies right now under the basic law, that assistance is really only available to very small systems and rural systems, but now is being made available across the country. And that they gave, it was a good chunk of money meant to get us through the summer and fall. Then the pandemic went on longer than we hoped. They came back in at the end of the last Congress, and they added about $14 billion to it. And then in the reconciliation package that was passed last month-ish, they added another big chunk of money, and we ended up over the year getting over $69 billion in transit operating assistance with the goal of keeping transit systems running through 2022. And that way, not just to help people on an emergency basis get through the rest of the pandemic, but hopefully through recovery and then whatever our new normal is going to be. And yeah, like you said, that was unprecedented. We've never done that before. And so, and have it happen, on a bipartisan basis. And I mean, it almost became a bidding war between the House and the Senate, was really exciting. I think there was just an understanding across the board that having transit go away was not going to be good, even for those of us who could drive, because it just doesn't do you much good to drive yourself to the grocery or the hospital if the people you rely on to have those systems work can't get there too.
Preach. That's true, right? I want to note that Nashville and Middle Tennessee did get a big chunk of change in that first CARES Act, did not qualify for the second round, and then did qualify again for the third round. So there's that. But I note of caution there to localities and local municipalities, like, do not get comfortable getting these infusions of cash from the federal government. It is on us to fund our transit locally. We've got to get it together and make it a priority and put it in the budget.
Jessica, there's a question in chat.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Let me see. So with Nashville a few years away from a dedicated transit funding effort, there's rumors of a few years on the horizon there. Is there a lower cost transit service improvement that cities have implemented to showcase speed and reliability?
There is no better way to provide good transit service than to up your frequency. Triple the buses on the road. On your current crappy system, triple the buses, quadruple the buses, quintuple the buses. You can get fancy, but look, I will tell you that the service I take more than any other transit service is a regular old boring in traffic bus service 3 blocks from my house that comes every 3 minutes.
Wow.
Frequency is the most important thing. Everything else comes after frequency.
Frequency is your trump card. If you can get that right.
Frequency is everything. If you know, no matter when you show up at that bus stop, you will never wait more than 5 minutes. People will take that line. Now, if you then want to give a dedicated bus lane so you can get more buses on there so that, you can just get.
So they're not stuck in that traffic that you talked about, right?
Wonderful. That's always wonderful. Number one, have a lot of buses come to your bus stop.
So the lowest cost proof of concept is just highest frequency you can muster.
Highest frequency. Just put a whole lot of buses on the road.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then you can talk about the next things. You can provide better signal timing, and you can get rid of those places where buses get out of traffic to pick people up. Terrible idea.
Oh, the queue jumps?
They can't, they're terrible. They have to get back in, they get blocked out. All of those little places for the buses to pull out of traffic is so that the cars don't get delayed, but they trap transit. Get rid of those. You can then improve your stops. You can straighten your routes. You can have express buses. Boy, I mean, I got to tell you, the express buses, you might have your local, but the express buses are incredibly popular. I can tell you in my own line, I will sit there and wait 5 minutes longer for the express than get on the local that is waiting for me. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do that cost nothing but adding buses. And then you can get fancy later.
Nice. Build on the foundations is what I'm hearing from that comment right there. Good question, Adam. So here's another one. During the pandemic, Nashville has cut down on its bus lines, or routes rather, and even the next 6 months, it will continue a shortened schedule. How would you recommend trying to increase the bus schedule or advocate for that?
So what I would do is I would look at what folks have done in terms of measuring access to jobs and essential services by all modes of travel. I would show how accessible your community is for people with a car and the average income of those people, and how accessible your community is for people without a car and the race and average income of those people. And I would make that public. I would put it online. I would have pretty color-coded maps to show it. I would put it before your city council, before your legislators, before your mayor, before your governor, and make people account for it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean we've been trying to show tell that story because even during the slowest months of pandemic, 12 to 14,000 people were taking transit in Nashville every single day. And those were the essential workforce, getting to hospitals, getting to pharmacies, getting to grocery stores, you name it. So we've got to tell that story.
I'd also say the whole transportation system is too focused on that work trip. Always has been before the pandemic. The question is, how well is your bus system designed to get people around their community to get to that pharmacy and grocery and things like that? Do they have to go downtown to come back to the neighboring neighborhood to get to the grocery? That's stupid. So we need transportation that serves the non-work trip. Before the pandemic, it was 80% of trips. That's the trip that wipes out the single mom. That's the trip that makes life unbearable. It's not the work trip. And we don't spend enough time focused on all how to get to the school, the daycare, the healthcare, the grocery, the pharmacy, the bank. Those are the
soccer fields, right. All those foundations of living a life that are so critical. I don't just need transportation to my job and back. I need it to all of the things that create a life and living for me and my family. So now for taking another turn, and we're going to address the American Jobs Plan. It's big. It's the elephant in the room. For those of you on the call, I'm going to give a very brief summary of the transit mentions. There are some links that we're dropping in the chat. One is the actual language of the bill, because why not? And then the other one is a white sheet from the White House. All right, so here are some highlights. This plan, we could build world-class transportation infrastructure, fix highways, rebuild bridges, upgrade transit systems. It would be historic and overdue investment in our roads, bridges, transit systems, allocate $621 billion in transportation infrastructure with an eye on resilience, which I'm curious to know what that means. It aims to redress historic inequities while building the future of transportation. Also, something that is pertinent to Nashville's conversation today, investments in reliable passenger and freight rail service and modernizing public transit would seek to address decades of declining public investment that has left our roads, bridges, rails, and transit systems in poor condition with $1 trillion backlog of needed repairs. There's that magic word, maintenance and repairs. Tens of thousands of people die in traffic crashes in the U.S. each year, and millions are seriously and often permanently injured. The U.S. has one of the highest traffic fatality rates in the industrialized world, double the rate of Canada and quadruple that of Europe. So with the AJP, American Jobs Plan, they're saying across cities, suburbs, and rural areas, this plan will help people get to work reliably, affordably, reduce impacts of climate change, and even make it safer. So they're basically trying to ensure lesser road crashes. Beth, can you talk to any of those things? I know it was kind of a lot, but what do you have on that for us? How can they ensure less road crashes, fewer road crashes?
Well, on the issue of the money dedicated in that proposal to a Vision Zero program, I will point out we really need a safe program, not a safety program. The whole program has to build safe roads. We don't need little tiny pieces of a program to fix the unsafe roads we built, which has been our attitude for decades.
So instead of creating a Vince and Larry commercial, right, the crash test dummies, just build roads safer at lower speeds so people don't crash and die.
Yeah. Right now, what we do is we say, here's $2 billion a year to fix your unsafe roads. But you can spend the other $40 billion a year just building more unsafe roads. I mean, it's a full employment act, right? You get to build the roads and then fix the lack of safety before you even rebuild the roads. It's a great deal. But what we really should do is stop building roads that have to be retrofitted. So
Right.
I would say, the proposal from the White House, and God bless the staffers who came in and were brand new in their job and had to put together a gigantic proposal between multiple agencies within a department and then multiple departments. I mean, this is an unbelievable task and a difficult job. But the distance between one paragraph of description of what will be in the highway program and legislation to make it happen, and that's a big distance.
Big, yeah.
And a lot can go wrong. So look, during the Recovery Act, we said we were gonna back in 2009. Y'all remember then? It's hard. But back in 2009, we passed the Recovery Act with a $45 billion windfall to fix our crumbling roads and bridges, and we spent that money building new stuff. So you can't dump money into the existing program, and because you say and you wish upon a star that the outcomes will be different, actually expect the outcomes to be different. This program, no matter how much money you put into it, will produce the same results it's always produced. If you want different results, you put money into a reform program. And what we do is we say, I want this program to produce great safety this time, but I'll just put money in without making it do that. And then we're surprised we get the wrong outcome. So I will say I'm waiting to see how the language in the fact sheet turns into legislative language. I'm thrilled to see so much money behind the transit and a focus on state of repair on the transit side as well. Mm-hmm. I love the language about reconnecting neighborhoods that were divided or destroyed by urban highways or other infrastructure. I think that's a really exciting concept. And I will be looking forward to seeing how those lofty, couple of sentences with beautiful words turn into actual programs that could produce those outcomes.
Right. I mean, spoken like a true professional who's seen things come down the pike a few times.
I base it on how many times I've lost the exact same way.
That's brilliant though. I mean, if you're failing, then you're learning, right? So when you lose, you learn a big lesson. Yes. Right? We shouldn't do it that way again.
Yes, I hate losing.
Right. So when that comes back around, you know what to look out for and yes. how to avoid those potholes or fill them in, as it were. So we're a little more than halfway through this conversation. You guys, please, if you've got questions, pop them into the chat, into the Q&A. I've got a couple more in the hopper for Beth. But, this is not just about me. You're here because you want to hear what, your question answered, perhaps. So what is it? Let us know. Let's see. We've got someone, David is asking you, Beth. I'm going to read it. I understand the cutouts causing slowdowns for transit. And I think that's the queue jumps we just talked about. What are your thoughts on the cutouts with bus controlled streetlights? Is that different?
It can be. I mean, look, the question is, why are you doing it? It really is. And you know what a transportation engineer is asked to grade on is vehicle delay. How many vehicles are slowed down by whatever's on the roadway? And a bus stopping and picking up passengers slows down all the vehicles behind it. And slowdowns of 5 or 10 seconds per car, much less 20 or 30, is worth
A lot.
in the world of engineers spending millions of dollars to fix.
Mhm.
That's why we have things called slip lanes, right? So where you can slip the light and turn right without having to stop at the light. It saves you time. No one has to queue behind you when the light turns green and they're waiting for you to turn right. All of that is because the goal is to stop people from ever having to slow down or stop ever. But there are things that we do to allow the bus to get a jump. That's a different thing. The intention's totally different. And so a lot of it is, what are we trying to do? And overwhelmingly in transportation, what we're trying to do is make sure that, yes, I'll grudgingly fund your bike ped and transit needs, so long as it in no way slows down, even by a couple of seconds, any driver ever. And that's what I'm trying to look for the rules to address and fix. And where we can, we should.
Right, because any highway or road or arterial is graded on how many cars it can get through more quickly. Right?
Absolutely.
Is that the big green book we hear referenced sometimes? Yes. Yeah.
Some of it is the Green Book, and some of it is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD.
That's the one. That's the one. Yes.
But so there's a little bit of overlap. I think in other countries, there's not so much design in their manual of traffic control devices. But the MUTCD has strayed into the design area a little bit, and that's often where it runs into trouble. There are weird things in the MUTCD. Again, the goal is to make sure that no car will ever have to slow down for any period of time. So to justify that maybe a mid-block crossing for pedestrians is needed, first 300 people a day have to risk their lives and run out into traffic. Now, if a bunch of them get hit, then we just criticize them for their error of jaywalking, and it's no one else's fault. But until enough of them risk their lives, we won't even consider giving them infrastructure so they don't have to risk their lives. And there's all kinds of stuff like that buried in both. And the general problem with the Green Book and the MUTCD is, if you want to build a one-size-fits-all highway type design, very easy to do. The flexibility built into them are, if you want to do a different design, first you make it up. And secondly, you have to go through this huge exemptions process for every design change you ask for, slowing down your project, which also drives up the cost, and then you'll get criticized in your review for doing it. I can't imagine why people don't use that flexibility.
Right. See, so many interesting seeds you've just planted there, right? Thank you for that. More questions popping in. Are tactical urbanism pilot BRT corridors a good step toward fully implemented BRT?
I like pilots everywhere all the time. I think that we need to assume that normal human beings do not redesign their physical community in their brains and then take strolls through it. That's not normal. And to understand how a change will impact them, they probably would need to interact with it and see and touch it. Now, it's not to use this as an excuse to not engage the community, but tell people, hey, we want to try something, and we'll try it for a limited period of time. And then we'll come and we'll talk to you and get feedback. What did you like? What didn't you like? Are there changes we can make to make you like it more? But let people really get a sense of what it's going to be like. I think people are less afraid of things if it's going to be temporary, and they know that there's an opportunity to pull it back. Mm-hmm. And from a perspective of a community or an engineer or a public works agency, you get to test new things before you actually put serious money into building something. So yes, pilots, curb management pilots, BRT pilots, crossing pilots. We're working with a bunch of communities in Washington State now. One of the communities has what is building or creating a portable crossing, and they're going to come into many sections along a corridor they're looking at rebuilding in the next few years. They're going to put in a temporary crossing. They're going to then survey people on what they thought of it, people in the neighborhood, what they thought of it, and they're going to pick it up and move it down the corridor and try it there too. Just really cool things going on. And I cannot encourage that sort of work more.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know what brings to mind? I used to see these images, like what engineers build and then how people actually walk. And I think these pictures come from like college campuses, right? So the engineers build these square, very large blocks, right? But people are cutting through and making their own footpaths. So yeah, that the idea of testing and piloting, and that's brilliant to make a movable crosswalk so people can test it out in different places to see where you're going to get the most foot traffic.
Yeah, and then the drivers discover, they might be afraid of the slowdown, but then they find out when they see it, it's not as bad as they thought. Or they say, you put it in the wrong place. If it was over there, I'd be able to see it better. Now we're getting legit feedback, and it's not a picture or a hard to decipher sketch on a piece of paper. So I'm really excited. COVID really created all kinds of pilots and tactical urbanism that taught cities a lot. I just hope it doesn't go away. Boston did a temporary BRT that they were going to put up for a month, and before, I think maybe it was 2 months, but before the end of the pilot, there was a demand for it to go permanent. It was terrifying to people before they piloted it, but once they saw it, it turned out it didn't create the problem they thought it would. So yes, I think work with communities, try things out before you go spend millions of dollars redesigning an area.
Right. Or just say no point blank because so many folks are saying we don't want it without giving the opportunity of a lived experience just to try it on for size. I mean, that's the reason we try on shoes and clothes, right? We need to know how it looks and how it feels.
Yes.
Right. So we've got a question here. It's very specific to Nashville. Let me see if I can broaden it for you for the purposes of our conversation. If we remove I-40, which is one of the interstates that cut through a African-American and Black neighborhood in Nashville, right?
Mm-hmm.
Devastating its culture and businesses, right? Black-owned businesses. If we move it from its current location, where should its replacement be built? And what will keep that new neighborhood from being affected like the old one was? So this is a conversation going on in Nashville right now. We're convergence of 3 interstates in our downtown. So how can we facilitate, and we have a ton of freight moving through all of those interstates. So how can we make that better or easier, right? So I think how would you answer that?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say, why does it need to be replaced?
Why would it need to be moved?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an assumption in transportation and the way people greet transportation that once a trip is established along a corridor, it cannot ever be removed because no people ever change their travel patterns in any way, shape, or form, no matter what. That is foolishness. New York City removed a highway. I got news for you. New York City has worse traffic than Nashville, and New York City has more freight than Nashville. They removed a highway and the trips went away. If New York City can do it, Nashville can do it. And that's what we find in most places. Just like when you build something new, you induce more trips than you expect. When you remove an asset, you lose more trips than you expect. Our models just can't detect it because our models were instructed to believe no trip would ever shift times. Nobody would travel at a different time. No one would travel by a different mode. No one would travel in a different corridor ever. So our models assume everything that's there has to remain. So in my home city of New Orleans, if you take down the Claiborne Expressway, which split Treme, the model says people will stay in the corridor and go on 10-mile-per-hour badly maintained streets that sometimes randomly run one way the wrong way. All of us would do that, right? We'd give up our 55-mile-per-hour elevated highway to go snaking through local streets that are in poor condition. Well, that's what the model says, so it must be true. I think we've got to recognize that a lot of our assumptions and a lot of what we base the program on is absolute garbage. If we actually looked back and check it, we would realize how bad our bases and our tools for choosing how to build a highway infrastructure is it's just trash. And we get better results if we actually held ourselves to a higher standard on a lot of those tools. But then also, if you just look at your region, you have a lot of highways that snake through your downtown. There are a lot of places that don't have as many. They accommodate just as much freight, sometimes more, and have less traffic. Nashville basically built a little bit more freeway capacity. They had an increase in freeway capacity of slightly more than population growth, but your congestion exploded. So you kept up with the population growth and your congestion got way, way, way worse. I don't think it's the highway capacity that is impacting your traffic. So I would suggest that you probably don't need to replace it. But this is a very good question, and they're facing it in Syracuse right now. They're taking down their viaduct, and now the state is basically trying to build the same highway at grade. That would absolutely destroy the neighborhood just as much as the viaduct. And so we've got to have tools that allow us to see that a different design altogether might be better for the community, and that we just cannot afford to snake our most valuable downtown property full of income sucking highways. We need to create jobs in that space. We need to create economies in that space.
Right. Absolutely. Agree with that. We're just 10 minutes out. If you have any last minute thoughts or comments, questions, please pop them into the chat now. But I just wanted to say that you can, for the conversation that we've been having, and especially from the Transit Alliance's perspective, we're really trying to build that support for transit. And I think that to the question you were just answering, why would we remove or replace I-40 when it's not really, we need to get to the bottom of the heart of why is our congestion out of control? Right. Yeah. It's right. That is the problem. So we need to find the solution to that. Add that and compound or put that back in.
Or you need to consider that congestion is what happens in a community where there are a lot of people and a lot of success, and that congestion is not to be solved. I can tell you, we can solve Nashville's congestion. We just need to turn your economy into Detroit's, and you will not have this problem anymore.
True.
Yay.
That's true. But we don't want to have that. We don't want to do a U-turn on our economy. We want a prosperous economy. We want more people, in fact, to be able to prosper from the economy. We want more people to participate. We want more people to build these deep roots of family and generational wealth. So we have to think about those questions as we're trying to solve these issues. And right now is a great time. You said something about our models say that once something's designed, those trips are never going to change. The same amount of cars are going to drive there at the same time every day for like forever, in perpetuity or whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, COVID has shown us that is not true, right? While we did see a marked decrease in traffic counts, those decreases have now dissipated. We have the same traffic counts as we did pre-COVID, but guess what? They're not at the same times. So people are driving at different times. We are making different trips. We're not making the same trips we've always made. So people do make different decisions. We are not monoliths. We are not automatons. We are individuals. We have lives that are complex and change almost daily. So yes, thinking of ways we can facilitate that would be mighty helpful.
Yeah, and I think the fact of the matter is we have hundreds of years of knowledge that if you provide a resource basically for free, it will be overused. So look, transportation, particularly at the moment, feels quite free and people use it as you would expect. Um, uh, Look,
Which is why autonomous vehicles have in research has proven they create more vehicle miles traveled and more traffic because people use them more. For instance, I will send my driverless car out to the airport to pick up my sister who just flew into town. So now there's an extra car on the road with no one in it,
yes,
creating more volume of traffic.
The AV is the great Rorschach test of transportation, whereby you declare, when someone asks you what will AVs do, you answer with your hopes and dreams. That's what you see in the AVs. So I hear people say we won't need as many parking lots because you can have your car drop you off at work and then drive back to your house. So you've just doubled the peak hours, right? Because that car is now doing double VMT. And then people will say, no. Actually, it will be significantly less congestion because you can just have those cars out there circulating, waiting for people. And then you say, well, wait, so now how many zero occupancy vehicles are we going to have? Because we already know from ride hailing that you need a certain amount of empty vehicles to be conveniently available because people don't want to wait for that kind of vehicle for more than about 5 minutes. And if you don't have enough and yet people have to wait 20 minutes, they won't use it. Then they're back in their personal vehicle. Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is we have to solve for the notion that every single person has to travel alone to every trip, which must be far away from their home. And that's going to involve a lot of land use changes. We're going to have to go back to a world where everything you needed was steps away from home. You can still live in your leafy community, like in across the river in Arlington, or even in my neighborhood. You walk a few blocks away from the town square and it's quiet and leafy and beautiful, but there's a town square, just like every rural community in the entire world. They have a town square and then quieter communities around it. And we could have a series of those rural communities throughout our cities, but it's illegal. So we're probably going to have to address those laws so that you don't have to drive 10 minutes away for every single thing you have to do.
So building and funding like it's the 1950s just isn't going to suit us.
No. And solving for congestion with transportation when the reason you have congestion is your land use, that's never going to work either. But it will waste a ton of money and destroy a lot of neighborhoods. So there you go.
So I think I got a couple more minutes for questions. What are some strategies for convincing the public to fund transit through public referenda to get out of the doom loop thought process of I wouldn't use it, therefore it is a waste of money?
Yeah, there have been, I'd look at other successful cities and what they've done. Not everyone has had the struggles of Nashville. Everyone loves to claim their uniqueness, and unfortunately this might be yours. But
we are not unique. We are not. We're not a snowflake. No. We're normal.
St. Louis County. Interesting tidbit about St. Louis. Back in the early 20th century, the city split off from the county because they thought the rest of the county was holding them back, and then the power switched. But St. Louis County is mostly the suburbs around St. Louis. They had a referendum for a tax to operate transit and increase some transit, mostly bus service, back like 10 years ago now. And they had a whole series about that exact issue. And they showed a student who said, their tagline was something like, you may not ride it, but you need it. And so
not all of us use it, but all of us need it. Love it. My favorite tagline for transit all time.
And so they went through all the people. They had a nurse that said, you might drive yourself to my hospital, but if I'm not there to take care of you, you're in pretty bad shape. Or the student that said, you might not need it, but you want me to get to school and become a productive member of society. Things like that. And I think COVID has shown people that in a way that they didn't expect. A lot of times people are suspicious about new transit, but everyone kind of recognizes if you take all that we have away, that is going to be bad. And so COVID has opened a lot more eyes to this. But again, maybe in the Nashville region, you just start by showing people more functional lines, by doubling the service, by straightening those lines and shortening people's paths to the things they need. And then, as people recognize the reliability, they then get excited about building something grand.
I think you even posted an article like that on Twitter this week about the best thing you can do to lure people into transit is to make it a good service.
Yeah,
just make it good.
Yeah. And I see this all over the country. They're building these beautiful separated services with 20-minute service. Again, my traditional bus service 2 blocks away in terrible traffic. 16th Street in Washington, D.C. has some of the worst traffic in the city. Bus comes every 3 minutes. That's my route.
That is incredible. 3 minutes. That's just incredible, Beth. So one last question, then I'm going to wrap up. So what can cities do to offset economic displacement that often follows major transit infrastructure investments?
Yes. So it turns out if the majority of your housing market wants transit and you provide it to no one, it becomes very expensive. It's what the diamond trade did, right? Diamonds are actually quite common, but if you mine them all and you keep them in a vault and you only release them little by little, they're quite expensive. Well, that's what our government has done with transit. They've made walkable transit-served communities rare and illegal in most places. So the people who get them are the people with the most resources. They can bid everybody else out. So one thing I would say is we just need a ton more of it. But secondly, all good investments have impact on property values. If you replace a lead pipe, property values go up by a lot. If you put a grocery in a food desert, property values go up by a lot. The fact of the matter is, if you make a positive investment, property values should go up. If you make a government investment and property values don't go up, that was not a good investment. So we need to think across the board, not just in transit, about an aggressive effort to ensure that when we invest in a community, the people who live there, particularly our most vulnerable people, get to participate in that investment and the upside of that investment. And the reason we don't have very good affordability practices in the country. And like I said, we look at those things that people desperately want and we don't provide it. So that rarity creates a real problem for our most vulnerable population. With our highway takedown proposal, we included a proposal to be very aggressive about making sure that we don't harm the communities we're trying to help yet again by displacement. We suggest putting money in, creating land trusts for the property that's regained, maybe the air rights that's built if you do a bridge, and using any property sales or leases to help people in that area buy and improve their property so that they get to participate in the wealth building of the increased property value rather than getting displaced by it. And those are the sorts of things we're going to have to think about because we haven't built the transit that people have been demanding for decades. And so it's going to take a long time and a lot of investment to catch back up to equilibrium between supply and demand.
Right. Thank you so much, Beth. And what I want to just kind of tie that together is it's going to take some intentional planning, is what you're saying. You need to go in and understand, talk to the community and be intentional, building trust with the community, building a rapport with that community and researching and asking them what they want so you ensure that you preserve it for them, right? Because transit infrastructure should help, not harm.
And I would say that's true across the board. There should be intentionality about every penny spent. We want to spend money to repair roads and bridges. That money should go through a program that is specifically designed to repair roads and bridges, not build new ones that we can't afford to maintain. We need intentionality that has been missing from our surface transportation program. It's time to put those intentions in.
Great. Thank you. My gracious, we thank you so much for your time, spending an hour with us today. We love your insight on this issue. To everyone who's participated and logged in on this webinar, thank you for your continued interest in creating a better, more improved Nashville region through transit. The link to this conversation will be emailed to you in a few days or sooner. I encourage you to share it with your networks and have your own conversations. please take the follow-up survey that'll accompany that, and register for next month's Lunchtime Speaker Series, where we will be talking with Jason Spain, Director of Tennessee Public Transit Association, okay, to ask the question, do we really need to convince people in the South about the value of transit? And is it a foreign concept? Because I hear that time and time again. Spoiler alert, that's not true. So please think about joining us. And thank you, Beth Osborne, for the work that you do through Transportation for America and otherwise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.